I turned it back off when I left the stage. Sorry, my bad. Well, here we are. And for anybody who's online that didn't get an explanation, I am wearing a football jersey. I asked Dr. Cloud for permission. He said that you would not be wearing a football jersey, but you said it was fine for me to go ahead and wear one. So I tried to participate in the request of wear a jersey. And while people are still clearing out, I'll just tell you, in case you're wondering, do I just have this jersey because today this is the team that's playing and I'm one of those fans that just follows whatever team happens to be winning that year? Like, the cars you see for the teams that have never won a ball game in their entire career and then they end up in the Super Bowl and everybody's their fan. You know who I'm talking about? No. Actually, I follow the players. And I think Patrick Mahomes is a great example. He's a Christian young man that leads a team and prays before the games. And Cheryl's wearing the Peyton Manning jersey for a similar reason. And we move teams based on the characters of the people who are on those teams. So we don't just root for a team regardless of who plays, if that makes sense. And then the final thing I thought of this morning that I didn't have time to put into my little 10 minutes of contribution is that John made the point about wearing a jersey for Jesus, which I think is a great idea. I wear this necklace Cheryl got me for Christmas with a cross that has Hebrew on it that says, "He has called me by name," to remind me. And let me tell you, if you're wearing something like that, or you're wearing a chosen shirt, or you're wearing anything that you realize as you charge in someplace to act probably like you shouldn't, and then you remember who you're advertising, it'll cause you to act a little differently. And we ought to do that every day, because that's what we say we are kingdom ambassadors and kingdom representatives of Jesus and the kingdom. So there's my little spill about jerseys. You'll probably never see me in one again on a Sunday morning unless I'm asked to do it again. So, but yours is great. I can just imagine a number there on the sweater vest. I don't know what number that is. I could ask Juanita. But so here we go into Job. Some of this we heard this morning. You want to take us into the thinker there sitting under the dead tree with the problem of suffering?
Well, obviously, there's several lessons on Job. I think 5 altogether, right? So this morning was an introduction.
It didn't come on. You don't have a green light.
You can't hear me.
Hang on. Yeah, hang on. I'll give you mine, and then I'll just use a mic. Stand by for technical difficulties. If we have a nifty little... All right, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now? All right. This is just minor suffering. We're getting ready to talk about major suffering, as Les talked about and as Stan talked about in the sermon today. But this certainly is a topic that needs to be discussed. It's very difficult in many, many ways. And so we're going to take you through a presentation today that gives you a really good idea of what we're going to be doing the next 4 weeks after this. But we found...
You found this one.
Right, we found different ones. Like the next one, I think, is the one you found, I believe.
Yeah, I really liked his thinker. If you're familiar with that, that's a statue that a lot of people know, and probably very applicable to Job as he's, as the friends are sitting with him that we'll talk about in a minute. If you want to know the book of Job, here's the Bible Project's complete blueprint of how it goes, and this was referenced briefly by Les this morning. You can see here, I know this is kind of hard to see in here. It might actually be easier to see online, but I encourage you to go to thebibleproject.com and watch Job. It's only like 7 minutes or less long, and it goes through all this, and it builds this for you that at the end you get this kind of placemat at the kids' table at a restaurant about Job. But chapters 1 and 2 over here on the left is prose, and then chapter 42 over on the far right, prose, and everything in between is the poetry that Les was talking about. You see all that interesting material there, and we'll cover a lot of it in the next 4 weeks. I don't know that we'll get it all, but that is an interesting way of looking at it. But we're starting with suffering, and we're talking about, just from the beginning, that Job had kind of everything. he was a very wealthy person that wouldn't have had probably a lot of opportunities in his life to have experienced suffering until now, right?
Yeah, things were going, it couldn't have been going any better for Job. That's the whole idea.
And he was such a godly man. You know, one of the things that didn't get mentioned this morning, I don't think, unless I was still already thinking about what I had to get up and say and I missed it, is that he would do things like offer sacrifices for his children just in case they had done anything that maybe they didn't remember doing. And that's a loving, fatherly type thing to do, but it's also a very endearing thing to say that, well, maybe my kids did some stuff that they don't realize or remember that would have been sinful, and so he'd offer a sacrifice on their behalf.
Yeah, this is trying to tell you here is a super sensitive person. He's just wants everything right. He worries about his children, but wants everything to go right with them, and he just wants to please God.
And so we got to get a little perspective then on the timeline. You might say, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about Job. That's clearly a picture of Noah and some people building the ark back there that's just a skeleton at this point. And that's because we have this interesting text in Ezekiel where Job is mentioned. The meaning of Job's name is uncertain. He's mentioned in the book of Ezekiel as one of three great examples of righteousness, along with Daniel and Noah. And maybe people didn't realize that.
Right, and so the very fact that Ezekiel here, writing almost about 600, is writing it, and he wants to talk about righteousness, and so he picks out these three people, and one of them being Job.
So many consider Job to be the oldest book of the Bible. There's a big debate about that, actually. Now there's some scholars that say we don't have any reason to substantiate that. But Job is the history of a righteous man's suffering, apparently due to a heavenly wager that we talked about this morning in the sermon, which I think we've probably covered that with the Satan. And Job debated issues of reward and punishment with four friends and was eventually vindicated by God, as we mentioned this morning. The book is framed by prose and the prologue and the epilogue, but then you've got all the poetry in the middle. And the poetic dialogue between Job and his friends debates profound theological issues, if you really think about it. And of course, maybe the biggest thing that is interesting is who is this character, which we went over this morning. You have the heavenly scene, so I'm not going to go back through all of that unless you have something you'd like to add.
No, the reason I picked out these cartoons was, how do you depict Satan? And it was really interesting on the internet, going to all the possible things they had on their different images, all that. It's really, they just have so many different ideas. So what frequently happens is we picture Satan in a cartoon situation, and but the problem is we really don't know how to picture Satan. We just really don't know how to picture him. So we have some things that are humorous, some things that meanness, pitchfork, and all that kind of stuff. The redness, we have no idea in the world how to picture Satan. So,
interestingly enough, though, I'm really glad we did this. Even though this information we covered this morning pretty well in the sermon, I like how you're saying we don't really know how to depict him. Maybe some of this, at least the color, maybe the red comes from, the horns come from maybe the idea of the dragon, right? Because he's also associated with that name as well that we didn't mention this morning in the sermon. But once you get past all the information you've already heard about the adversary and the opposer, look at this. This is something that I don't know if you knew I was going to put in after we talked on Friday, but the angel of light and the concept of Satan not actually standing out looking like that or looking grotesque or looking extremely scary, but actually looking very inviting and maybe even beautiful. So there's some controversy about the texts that are on the screen, Ezekiel 28, 12 through 19, and Isaiah 14, 12 through 15. I don't know, we may not even agree completely, but I know that the Ezekiel text claims that it's about the prince of Tyre, but I'm pretty sure that after you read that opening part of verse 1 there in Ezekiel 28, you can probably know for certain that the king of Tyre was not in the Garden of Eden and was probably not the one who is then described from there on. So I think that is a collusion of things. I think they're basically saying that the prince of Tyre thought of himself in a harmful way, like the devil thought of himself. And so the rest of that description there matches the being that would have been in the garden, and it is very explicit about how beautiful this person, this being is, right? He had everything. He fell in love basically with himself, and then said something to the effect of, I want to rise up above and be more important, more powerful than Yahweh. I want to assume his status, which I don't think is even possible. But then Isaiah comes back and repeats that. And so I think maybe we don't give, unfortunately, the devil the credit of his conniving and his chameleon-type ways of being, that he doesn't stand out as a pitchforked, horned, red dude with a tail with an arrow on it like Bugs Bunny and whatnot tells us. He comes across as somebody who's very attractive and appealing. Now, you know me, if I could have found some without the wings, that would have been good. But here's something interesting in these two pictures, if you're really looking at them closely. You have a serpent under his feet on your right, and you notice that he is sitting free on whatever that is he's sitting on. But on the left, the serpent is gone, and he's wearing a shackle, and that shackle is chained, and he can't get up and go very far, which all of that is scripturally supported. And then maybe 2 Corinthians 11:14 might be the succinct way to say this. Satan is transformed into an angel of light, if you wondered where I got that term. There's an old song by a Christian band called Petra that sang a song on that I listened to growing up. And, it really makes it sound like, well, you didn't know this was coming either, but Pinocchio. I always think of the Pinocchio cartoony movie when I think of the Angel of Light, because what happened to Pinocchio and the boys he was hanging out with when they went to where all of the fun stuff was, all the stuff they shouldn't participate in, right? They started becoming donkeys. They started having their ears pop out and they started neighing. And it's kind of like all that stuff that's attractive with the neon signs and with all of the supposed sales of fun and what you want to be involved in is light. It's all lights. It's just the wrong kind. It's the kind that enamor us and draw us to those lights, but that's what we're actually a lot of times supposed to shun. All right, well, why don't you take us through this one? This was one you put in.
Yeah, again, we've heard a lot about Satan this morning and Stan's lesson and less at all. But this statement here always just rings a bell with me. Where we've been roaming through the earth, he replied, and walking back and forth in it, causing trouble, doing negative things.
Yeah, and then the question that's raised was interesting. The question is righteousness for its own sake, or is it for prosperity? What's the real motivation? And so you might say, if you were new to the story of Job, well, it certainly seems like it's for prosperity, right? If I say I love God and I worship God, and then I have 7,000 camels and all these different things and land, and my children are happy and everything's going great, then it looks like I should continue to worship God and continue to be in reverence to Him. But what the Satan is saying is, well, take that stuff away, and you won't be good enough without those blessings for Him to keep worshiping you. And so it really comes down to what is it for? Is it for righteousness, or is it for prosperity? And Job is a test case in this issue as God holds him up as an example of true devotion to Him, knowing that he's not going to turn from Yahweh regardless of what possessions or even his loved ones. And what's fascinating to me in this story, really troubling actually, my entire life, is that we don't know Job's wife's name. She doesn't have any calamity come to her, and she's the one trying to tell him to curse God and die. But his children all die, and then at the end, he's rejoicing that he gets more children back. He actually apparently has more children than he had to begin with, and he gets all of his stuff back. And I'm kind of like, yeah, but those people are unique, and they're still gone. I don't know about that. That's like when I lose one little dog and I get another dog. I'm happy to have a dog again, but that new dog doesn't mean I don't love the one I can't be around anymore. So
that bothers me. I don't know that I get to the end of Job and go, oh, well, all those people died and all that stuff happened, but he got everything back and got more back, so life is perfect. No, he probably still misses his kids that the house collapsed on.
Sure. Well, again, it had to concentrate on some basic principles, and
Right.
therefore couldn't deal with all the things that we deal with. So that's probably a simple answer, but
All right, I'll take a simple answer from you. I don't get those very much, so I'll take one. Usually they're quite deep and complicated. So after questioning whether Job's faith is disinterested, God permits the Satan to take away all of his possessions and see how he'll react. And when he loses all of his wealth and his children, as we've just said, and their picture on the right shows the house collapsing on the children and that they've been crushed. And Les alluded to it, but the text actually says that each one of these announcements, whoever it is the only one who has escaped. That's always interesting. I know you have a story on that probably, but we think about how we get human history. Somebody has to survive in order to tell the story, right? We even see sometimes in entertainment, in movies, they leave somebody alive on purpose because they want somebody to go tell the story. If they had killed them too, then there would be nobody to explain it. Well, that's going on here. One person gets away from the first calamity. He's telling it to Job. And while he's still talking, the next person that got away from the second calamity starts telling it to Job. And the third person who gets away from the third calamity starts telling it to Job. And people are talking over each other about all the terribleness that's going on.
right. Yeah, these again, it's like when Sodom was when Lot was carried away. One guy got away to come to talk to tell Abraham
Yeah.
about the story, and again, these outsiders, people maybe not connected with him, and again, in a way, the children were still his wife's children,
Right.
and she's basically showing bitterness right off the bat in contrast to him.
Yeah, now here's a little curveball. I don't disagree. I also wonder if she loves Job enough to hate to see him suffer this way and thinks that God will forgive him if he just goes ahead and curses God and dies, and he could get out of his suffering. Maybe, maybe not, but I know that today there are probably people who would contemplate that, right?
Yes.
They would say, hey, this I can't survive this. So if I can't survive it, I'll just go ahead and get out, and then I'll deal with if that was a wrong decision or not. But Job decides, no, even with my wife saying it, whichever way she's saying it, she may be saying it sort of in opposition, or she may be saying it out of concern for him, whichever, but he still doesn't do it. And I think that's a interesting thing too. So I like your cartoon you put on the right. Your children, your cattle, your possessions, they're all gone. And now Job is just kind of, he doesn't know, it's getting dizzy. He doesn't even know where to turn.
Yeah, even though it's in cartoon form, I thought it really brought out the feeling. It just all this has come crashing in on him, and I can't relate to anything like that. I've never had anything in my life, that even can relate to a true disaster. I just really have never had any true disasters. Don't want any, but never have had any.
Well, hang on. We're going to come back to that. I think you're forgetting one. The picture on the left, I didn't think about this until today. The devil is using things that are going to convey that it's not him, that it's Yahweh. Lightning striking and killing your herd looks like the creator of the universe controls the lightning, right? Fascinating. That's deception of like, hey, God's doing this to you. God is not doing this to Job. But things that are only from God appear to be doing it to Job, which is misleading. So your disaster, and thinking about one that got away to tell the story. Wasn't your dad holding the rope to the Hindenburg when it blew up?
Oh, my stepfather was one of the sailors pulling the Hindenburg in 1937 when it caught on fire. He was actually one of the sailors there, and that was 1937. And then Mother married him in 1950. We moved to Lakehurst Naval Air Station. I worked there on the base with those helicopters and blimps. He got me a job in the cafeteria, and I was a Sea Scout on the base when I was 16, 17 years old. So yeah, he was He was actually pulling it in when it caught on fire in 1937.
So there was a disaster avoided.
That's right. That's right. 13 years before we met each other.
So we might say that Job's theology is kind of summed up in Job chapter 1, verse 21, where he says, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And this reminds me of David. I guess I can do spoiler alert now. If you haven't seen episodes 1, 2, and 3 of season 4 of The Chosen yet in the movie theaters that are still on through Wednesday, well, number one, you should. But there's a scene I'm not going to tell it to you where you're going to be like, I can't believe Stan told us that. There's a scene where David and Bathsheba are in mourning at the beginning for the child that they plead and plead and plead with God. Please don't take this child from us. And the child dies. And David gets up and cleans and goes and worships. And they're flabbergasted. They're like, how do you go and worship after he didn't do what? And he basically says this. He says, hey, who am I to question God? And Job's saying the same thing, right?
Yeah, correct.
Well, then he's subjected to another round of testing where the Satan says, okay, well, that didn't work. So now let me affect his actual body. And God says, well, you can't kill him. But I don't know, guys and ladies. I think pus-filled sores all over me and me being so miserable that I'm going to scratch them with a pot shard, that sounds pretty terrible.
Yeah, it's again, I've never been afflicted with anything even close to that, so it's just hard for us to imagine some of these things.
Yeah.
But just a lot of terrible things are happening to Job, and he ought to be, cursing God in the eyes of a lot of people, and a lot of people do. They turn and blame God.
And so here comes his unnamed wife. Curse God and die in chapter 2, verse 9. But he does no such thing. So this was an interesting picture. He's sitting there with the sores you can see all over him. And she kind of comes and says, hey, there's a way out of this. You can just take your medicine, as they say, and just get it over with and then deal with the consequences. Or you can sit here for who knows how long this is going to keep going on. And that's interesting without sounding, without it going too dark. I think that's just life in general, right? We can get older and we can remember the younger days when things worked and we could see at our arm length and not have to have glasses, and we could drive at night and see, or we could run a 50-yard dash, or whatever it is for you that you fill in the blank with. Remember why you walked into the kitchen? They say if you'll get the memory foam shoes, you'll never forget why you walked into the kitchen again. I don't know, but my point is, we start seeing that we're degrading and we're decaying and things aren't going well. And at some point, I suspect I will join with others who've thought this. It's just like, okay, if this is the end, good, because I'm tired of suffering through this. But that's life. That happens to everybody. So maybe Job was saying, I don't know how long this will take, but I know that God is the author of life, and I'm not going to take mine, or I'm not going to curse him for the one I have, even though he does regret the day that he's made, which is really dark.
Yeah, here are two people with two different total attitudes, and apparently that's going to be her way. I guess she's thinking she'll just curse God and die also, but...
Yeah, because she says, he says, do you still retain your integrity, is what she says, curse God and die. And then he says, you speak as one of the foolish women.
Right. So it again is just showing you what kind of faith he had.
Right. That's a powerful way to think of that. What shall we receive? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? Now that one troubles me a little bit. I don't think God sends evil, but I think what we've got to remember is that Job doesn't know about the opposer. He doesn't know about the accuser. He doesn't realize where this is actually coming from. So in his mind, it is God handing him these things.
The word, the word evil translates a word that means bad, evil. It's a word that's a very broad word. It can be used of
figs.
Figs in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah sees two baskets of figs, a basket of evil figs, the older versions say. I don't know what an evil fig is. one that flirts with all the other figs or something like that. Or the King James translation, a naughty fig. But it meant rotten figs, what it meant. So it's bad. It ain't a basket of tasty figs or good figs. So that word is a very broad word. It can talk about something that's rotten, something that turns bad. Doesn't have to be anything ethical or moral. And so it has all those, different meanings. So if something bad happens to you, in the book of Jonah, you have Jonah upset because he wants God to sock it to them. He wants God to do evil. And the word there means punishment. It means something on the negative side. And basically, this is what he's saying there. And again, he's, as Stan said, he's just expressing an idea that God's in control of everything.
Well, I really like that. I like the contrast between Tov and Ra. Tov being good, Ra being bad. But, naughty fig, we don't know what the fig did to get labeled naughty. But what we could say is that anything that's falling short of what it's supposed to be is therefore spoiled or bad or rotten or not right. And so in the broken world that we're in, because sin is in it, God doesn't just remove all decay and rottenness, and fruit still spoils, and people still do bad things. And so I think to look at it that way, it's not something that's sent from him with a, hey, here's what I'm going to do to Rodney and Stan. It's more of a, Rodney and Stan are going to suffer through some stuff because that's the way the world is right now, and bad things happen, and sometimes bad things happen to good people. And Job's saying that that's what he understands. Right. She's making it sound like bad things don't happen to people who love God and stay loyal to him. So you must be doing something wrong.
Yeah, and the three friends that are going to come first, they are, if you've got friends like Job had, you don't need any enemies, okay? You've heard that expression before.
Yeah, so here they come. The prose section ends with the three friends arriving to comfort, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And boy, do they. They sit down and they comfort him for a whole week by saying absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I don't know if I would find a picture that would fit that, but there's a picture showing they're sitting around. I put the words up at the top, but it was obvious to me that this big group of pictures that was on the internet that they were trying to express that come and sit there for, a whole week and do not say anything.
But you know what? So I can relate to this on one level. Let's say something catastrophic happens to somebody I love, and I end up in their in their presence, right, at the hospital room or at the funeral home or whatever's going on, and you kind of think to yourself, all right, I'm going to walk in there and say something, and I'm going to wish whatever it was I said I hadn't said. Like, I'm going to stick my foot in my mouth. It's going to sound like I'm not as sad as I should be. It's going to sound like I'm making a lesson out of it or whatever. So freeze up and don't say anything. Nothing is better than something that was not good, right? And I wonder if that's what they're thinking. It's like, here, they're sitting there thinking, you go first. No, you go first. What are we going to say to this guy? And so for a week, they don't say anything.
If you can imagine being in a funeral home, man, here's got 10 children have been killed, and you come to visit someone, and so you just sit in the back and don't go up and talk to them at all. Now, the first thing we do, we immediately go to them, and we try to find some kind of words of comfort, say something nice, just something that we think will help. And so they were thinking totally different.
All right, now we always keep it really real in here. Here's what we do a lot of times in that situation you just described. We get up there, you've waited. I've done it right here in this room many times. The casket's down here. I've waited in line, and I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to say when I get up there? What am I going to say when I get up there? And enough contemplation and study and prayerful listening has at least changed me into an individual who will not come up here, as long as I can keep from doing it, and talk about me. But I hear everybody else do it. You get up here and you're like, well, I remember when my uncle so-and-so passed away, or my aunt or my niece or my mom or my dad or whatever. And there starts to be this story of, hey, you're not the only one. I've gone through this same thing. I know how you feel, I know how this feels. I'm praying for you, whatever. And then you walk off, I think. I know I'm doing a lot of ifs, but you walk off and that person probably thinks, wonder how that sounded to them. Kind of sounded like, join the club. You know, the rest of us suffer all this stuff too. They can't say that. They're sitting there with, we can't even make it about us. We can't say, well, I remember when I got pus-filled boils all over my body and when my children were struck dead for no reason and whatever. They're searching for, how do we join this story with Job and make it sound like we can empathize? And they can't. They can't empathize at all.
One time that I was really dreading. I was at the Pennington Bend congregation and had a really nice group of young people, and they wanted me to stay. I was there that summer filling in for Dr. Kirst. They wanted me to stay with. He came back in the fall, and they said, "We'll be our youth director." So I said, "Fine." And probably most people would have said that this young man that I'm about to tell you about was the cream of the crop. He was just an incredible young man, and he just to give you an idea, he was like 21 years old. He had graduated from high school and gone to work for, I think it was Kroger's, and they had made him a manager of a store at his age, and he was helping another friend with his store and stayed up all night helping him decorate the opening they had, and fell asleep the next morning on the way home at 6 o'clock and was hit by a dump truck and killed. And so the funeral came, and it was really tough. Here was just the nicest young man. I never met anybody any nicer, really, than that young man. He'd been right in the top group, no doubt about it. And his wife, he'd just gotten married. He'd been married only 6 months, and his wife just had fallen to pieces. And again, knowing what to say. You know, sometimes you don't know what to say. There's no doubt about it. You just don't know what to say. And it was a really hard sermon to preach. Very hard sermon.
There's a saying, not applicable to your story, but back to these three friends, that goes something like, if you don't know what to say, don't say anything at all. Because if you say something, you will show your ignorance compared to keeping it hidden for a little bit longer, right? And I wonder if that's also applicable here too, is that anything they would have said would have, and really they do. I mean, here we're talking about how it breaks into the three cycles, chapter 12 through 14, 15 through 21, and 22 through 28. And I know we're kind of doing a big overview this morning. The lessons are going to go more into topical things over the next 4 weeks that are about different subject matters that Job speaks to, not just a verse by verse exposition of Job. But they kind of do that. They end up saying things that don't really make a lot of sense, like, you know, well, you must have done something wrong. Well, you're just not remembering. You know, you're saying that you're innocent, but we know that because of these situations, clearly you're not. And I think those are comments of exposing their ignorance. You know, like, Job's actually correct, and they just keep talking, and they just keep suggesting that he's not correct. And almost to the point where it seems kind of like in the narrative, he starts to maybe question if he's correct or not, just for a glimpse.
Yeah, we don't know what you've done, but you've done something really bad. I mean, they just, when they sit down, he's guilty. He's deserving what he got. He's apparently he's done things really horrible they don't know about, but they just start attacking him and saying very, very cutting things and biting words.
Yeah, here we said they criticize and condemn, and it's interesting that apparently even creation is coming. The jackals or whatever, hyenas or whatever has been in the background there, wild dogs are there with them too. I don't know why the artist put that in there, but I mean, this is very judgmental, and they're just saying, quite frankly, you know, you've done something. And then Elihu speaks up.
Yeah, these guys now have not said any, you read all those chapters, those cycles, and they have not said one good thing about Job. They just worked him over all the way. And so Job's going to become defensive naturally. and Job feels bad enough as things are. Job feels to some degree like they're right. But then a fourth friend appears, a young friend, as he's called. And like I say, I would have called those first guys three acquaintances, although the word can be translated friend.
Yeah, but this guy's not going to be completely stellar either.
Right. He's going to point some things out.
Because in Job 32, Elihu focuses his response on rebuking Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Because Elihu was younger than the other friends, as Dr. Cloud just mentioned, and he had held his peace during their conversation. So he might be a little bit smarter. He waited to hear what all the rest of them were saying before he decided to throw his 2 cents in, as we say. But he could finally take no more. And we're like, good, this guy's going to finally come in and say, you guys are wrong. But instead, he gets very angry with Job for justifying himself rather than God. Yeah. So he just piles on from a different angle on Job on top of what they're doing.
Right. Now, he does blast the friends, the so-called friends first. He really, along the way, he does say, you guys are some friends. Like I said, if Job has friends like you, he needs no enemies. But as Stan is saying, what happened to Job, of course, he became defensive through all of this, and Elihu goes after him about that.
Yeah, and there the quote there at the bottom from 2 through 3, he's upset because the other three found no way to refute Job, and yet had condemned him. So basically, he's saying y'all's arguments are not good, and so he's mad at them for continuing to heap that on without any evidence that they're actually correct, and yet also upset that Job is now turned to completely defending himself rather than defending God.
Right.
So a very complicated matter, and that's really why we called it a theological debate, I guess, or discussion. And then in 33, Elihu turns his attention to Job, and he declares Job wrong in saying that he's without sin. Yeah. And so that's interesting. And in Job 34, he shifts and he declares God's justice. So he's really at this point sort of an ambassador for Yahweh, irrespective of what's going on between Job and the other three. And then in 35, Elihu turns again to Job in condemnation. In verses 1 through 14, he says, indeed, God does not listen to empty pleas. So almost like saying, well, the reason God's not doing anything for you is because you're in vain. You're empty in what you're saying. If you would just go ahead and say that you've sinned, then he would listen to you. But you're continuing to contend that you don't, and so therefore he's ignoring you.
Yeah. And keep in mind now, these disasters didn't come because of sin. You take the story of David, the David, Bathsheba, Uriah story. It was David coveting, then David committing adultery, then David murdering to cover up all of that. And therefore, he is going to pay the price the rest of his life. He will struggle in many ways. He asked God to forgive him. God said, I will forgive you for that. But even though sometimes God forgives us, the consequences of our actions are still going to stay. And so we have here Elihu is the kind of person who is analyzing the total picture. He said, let's talk about the nature of God. Let's talk about what you talk to your friends about, what you guys are saying and how wrong you are. And to Job, what are you really saying, Job? And he deals with all of that.
Yeah, so Job wants answers. Another artist's rendition of maybe him standing there kind of saying, God, speak to me. Tell me what's going on. And Elihu's 4-part speech is followed by God finally breaking the silence. And he does give Job answers, but he gives Job answers in the form of questions, which, sometimes we like. That lets us learn, right? Which I think Job is an example of learning from those. God breaks his silence in 42:7, and the Lord condemns Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Elihu is not mentioned, again, after he finishes his speech, which is interesting. God just doesn't say anything about him. Yeah.
Definitely approved much more of what he was doing than what the three were doing.
Yeah, so he's not rebuked by God. And then at the end of the book, the prose returns for an epilogue in which the friends are rebuked for not having spoken of God in the right, by God, in contrast to Job. And then Job intercedes for them. So just like his children, we go all the way back to a flashback of how he made the sacrifice in case his children didn't realize something. Job steps in and intercedes for his friends, making a sacrifice like he did for his children at the beginning. His goods are restored in double quantity. So like we mentioned when we started class, he gets his children back and his possessions, and even more so. And God stresses his power and otherness from human beings. He says, who are humans to judge God or to try to limit him? In other words, why do you think you can understand, A, me being God, B, what's going on that you don't even realize what it is, because he's not up there in the council. He doesn't know what conversations have taken place. And God creates and sustains the world in its grandeur and magnificence. How can he be held to account by human principles of justice? In other words, you just don't understand, Job. And then he starts with this, where were you? These questions about the relationship between the Creator God and human beings give the book its real wisdom and theological depth. Job's response is to yield in the face of God's words in understanding, to realize that his knowledge is just finite and he doesn't know the answers to this stuff. And God asks him everything from where were you when I did these things to where do I keep the snow, which is interesting. You just stop and say, yeah, how does all that stuff work with the water cycle and the way God has order to creation and how everything works? And so Job answers and he says, after God's speeches, in effect, he basically says that he embraces his place in creation as a human, not understanding what he doesn't understand. And he recognizes his own finitude and submits to God in humility. He says, I despise my words because I spoke wrongly about you, God, and I turn from my line of thinking in submission. So in other words, I'll just give up this quest of understanding you and your ways and how you work and what's going on that I don't know. And I should have, I redact my statements and my question. I should have never said it.
Yeah. Just thought of something that earlier we were talking about, you were wondering about if you had a child die or something like that, or 2 or 3 children died, and the other children took the place later, you'd still think about the other children, sure.
Sure.
But I saw a movie this week, and this it was a Western, and this wagon, crazy, anyway, the parents were killed, and the children, and in this town, and this woman who had lost her baby had died of pneumonia, and they asked her to keep this baby until they got things straightened out, and the baby was about 6 months old, and so even though she still remembered her baby, this baby helped heal the wounds to some degree. Maybe it was something like that.
That's a good point. I can understand that with my little animals that don't live as long as we do. And so Dr. Cloud found this. I thought this was great. This just gives you a comparison between Job chapter 1 and chapter 42, before and after. You can see there's just a whole lot more on the right-hand side than there are on the left-hand side. So God rewards Job for remaining faithful, remaining loyal to him, which we see he does the same thing with David. My thoughts on that. Job never denounces God and never turns to anything else in his place. He keeps him there regardless of what the circumstances are. And then you added this from Job 1, 21 through 22. Job says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So through all of this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. And that's the loyalty that God asks us. So even when we don't understand what's going on, just remain faithful and loyal to him.
So, and 3 different people working on this lesson and the sermon, and both in the sermon and this lesson, we had that statement because it's such a powerful statement.
Absolutely.
Powerful.
So rounding this out, week ahead, where do you turn when life comes crashing in on you? And this will be a question we kind of carry forward to next week. Does God hurt people and call it good? I think we've I think we've covered that this morning. No, he doesn't. But sometimes it looks like it's him because of things that are only from him being misused. What does the presence of evil and suffering say about God's love, power, and purpose? Well, we're free will beings. If there wasn't the ability for things to not go the way they're supposed to, we would be robots. And I can't really love you unless I have the choice not to. Like you say to me, Stan, for us to be friends and for this to work, I expect you to treat me this way, and this way. And then if I don't, which is my free will to do, then the true love is that I choose to do what honors you and takes care of our relationship. And that's something I have to decide to do. If it was robotic, then it wouldn't be real. So looking back over your life, we ask, when have you experienced the most significant increase in faith? And that paragraph there is going to tell you, if you look at it quickly, I know we're right up against the clock here, but I would just succinctly say when we've reached our lowest places, when everything's going great and all the blessings seem to be flowing and everything's hunky-dory, we don't usually think about changing our thinking. But when things are at their lowest or at the darkest and God pulls us through that, that's when we actually get shaped more and more into the image of Christ. So this week's prayer is this: God of all comfort, may my help in trouble be near me. Look on me with mercy, comfort me with your presence. Preserve me from the enemy and give me patience in my affliction. Restore me to health and lead me to your eternal glory through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And have a blessed day. And enjoy the Super Bowl.